and welcome to the Teaching Together podcast, where we celebrate and share the glows and grows of teacher life. I'm Sierra.
And I'm Grace.
Each episode in the podcast, we like to start with a glow or grow. Because this is kind of the start of a year, it might be a good time to reintroduce why we do this. So glows and grows is a feedback strategy where you can choose some things to celebrate, glows, and one thing to sort of grow in or focus on as a growth area. So we like to start each of our episodes with a glow or a grow from our teacher lives. So Grace, do you have something you can kick us off with?
Actually, in real time, yesterday I spent a day at school with my grade leader refining our programs for this year. And it was really nice because she has literally over 20 years of experience in kindergarten and is obviously a very accomplished teacher. And it was just the two of us. And it was a really good opportunity to contribute to our programs, but also to learn from her. And and she's really good at articulating her thinking for me, making her thinking visible. So like to explain why she is responding the way she is or where her ideas are coming from or whatever, which really helped me to go, okay, so this is what we're looking for in different learning activities when we're choosing them. This is the purpose of this program or whatever. And it honestly, it felt kind of like PD, even though it wasn't. We were just there of our own accord. But we spent like 4 hours, which went so quickly. They were exhausting. We were both absolutely knackered by the end. But we spent a good 4 hours just talking about our programs and refining what we'd put together with our whole kindy team from last year, because there's 4 teachers in my kindy team. And yeah, I felt so motivated to start this year. And I also was really thankful for that opportunity just to work one-on-one with my grade leader because she is so experienced. It was great. It was really positive, and I think we both came out of that feeling a little bit more energized for this year. Yeah, so that was a huge glow. Yeah. What about you, Sierra?
I think I'd actually have to say our chat with Andrea from the other week is still a little bit of a glow for me. So many things I've taken away from that. Yeah, really thinking about the 3D mind mapping and how I might be able to integrate that into some of my classes this year. Yeah, I'm just feeling still really quite inspired and I guess challenged also to think about how there's so many things out there that really work and I don't have to, I guess, always work from the ground up, but I do want things to be purposeful and meaningful. So there's, I guess, always a balance for me between like, I don't need to reinvent the wheel always, but I do want things to be really good and to work for my cohort in this particular point in time. An activity that's written in a program for a previous year might not necessarily be the best approach for the learners that I have with me now. So yeah, I really feel excited about the things that I walked away from that conversation with. And yeah, just think that they're going to be fantastic resources that are really adaptable. And I think that was her big thing, both for you with your 5-year-olds and me with my 15-year-olds. There's so much to take out of that. And even if it's not exactly the way that she uses it in her context, it's all about, how can you creatively manipulate this to work for you? And yeah, those kinds of things get me excited. And yes. I think that was a really big glow for me leading out of the holidays and into term 1.
Yeah, I think it was just the dose of positivity and energy that we needed to go, oh yeah, I actually love my job and I'm excited to go back, even though I would love to be able to sleep in all the time. Yeah. If Sierra hasn't already convinced you to listen to that episode, you really should give it a re-listen. Like it seriously was amazing. Andrea is amazing. And I cannot recommend that episode highly enough because we were just in awe of her expertise. So do yourself a favor, go listen to Andrea's episode and thank us later.
I really felt like when I was talking to her, she was kind of like my long lost auntie.
Yes.
I mean, like she's just a beautiful person, really helpful. And to be that many years into your teaching journey and to still have so much excitement and passion, I think is what was also really, really a highlight. Yeah. Well, rolling out of that and thinking about all those different strategies and how we want to set our classrooms up for the year, it's an especially good time to be thinking about the kind of learning culture that you want to establish in your classroom. I know in my classroom, I always put a lot of value on problem solving, and I think this is something that a lot of teachers would say is important, especially in this era of like critical thinking and 21st century skills, and we want our students to be problem solvers. But a big part of being a problem solver is actually making mistakes and then using strategies to work out where things went wrong. So what I guess I'm seeing is that when students come into a classroom with a fear of making mistakes, this is a really big barrier to trying to get them to develop those problem-solving and critical thinking skills and self-regulated behaviours that we say we want them to have. But I actually think, their stress about making mistakes and wanting to be correct is a huge hurdle for a lot of them to get over. And so there's a few different studies that have come out of 2024 looking at errors in the classroom. And today we're just going to have a little bit of a look at an overview of what the research says about mistakes and how we can use them effectively and set students up. I think this is the big thing, to feel safe to make mistakes and then leverage that for their learning. But before we go any further, it's time for tea.
Welcome to everyone's favourite part of the show, where we share our tea. And I'm actually, peek behind the curtain, I'm drinking coffee right now. And the tea that Sierra lovingly made for me before was, of course, French Earl Grey. But I thought I'd just chuck a recommendation out there. It's not Christmas anymore, but there is a great Christmas time tea that's called Mulled Wine Magic. It's so good. If you're a fan of pumping pomegranate from T2 or just any kind of fruity teas, the Mulled Wine Magic tea is excellent. It's a very full-on, intense flavour, kind of like the pumping pomegranate. It's the same colour, but it's got that little bit of spice that you would get with actual mulled wine. So if you're looking for something a little bit zesty for your tea life, I would highly recommend. Anyway, Sierra, what are you drinking?
I'm having a cup of the desert lime and lemon myrtle tea that I got a few weeks ago. Still loving it. It is also fresh and zesty, so also highly recommend.
I love that, fresh and zesty. I want that on a t-shirt.
All right. Well, it's not surprising to know that people don't like making mistakes.
What?
I was wondering if you had a fantastic mistake story that you might be able to...
Oh, there's got to be so many. I just sometimes say dumb stuff. Actually, there was a driving mistake. I just left my house and I was turning right and just pulled out, and I don't know what I was doing. I thought I'd checked everything, but then this poor car was trying to drive straight across in front of me and could have T-boned me, and we both could have been seriously injured. Thankfully, he was more alert than I was and slammed on the brakes, and I was like, Grace, what are you doing? You know how to drive. You have your full license. The government trusts you in a vehicle. But it was not my most intelligent moment ever. And not good.
I find that often, if you make a mistake when you're driving and it's just you in the car, it's kind of easy to just go, oh, that was dumb, or kind of blame it on the other person and just move on.
And never tell a soul about it.
But when I'm driving with my dad in the car.
Oh, no.
Who taught me how to drive.
Yep.
Anytime, I just feel like my capacity to make good decisions goes absolutely out the window.
100%.
And it's just funny how the context in which you make a mistake makes a big impact on how you might feel about that mistake.
Oh, yeah, 10 out of 10. If I'm alone in my house... Oh, actually, this reminds me. I was alone in my house one time, chopping up some capsicum. In my brain, I was like, I wonder how...
She's actually lost it.
I wonder how the mum capsicums feel like when their children are like,
disassembled
and eaten. Because I was like kind of thinking about like chickens and eggs. And then in my brain, I was like, Grace, capsicums aren't sentient beings. They don't have thoughts and feelings. They don't have brains. And I was alone. It just occurred in my brain. Like my dog didn't even hear it. I was just like, that was the dumbest thing I've ever thought in my entire life. And I've actually told that story to many people. But generally, if I make a mistake, like if I do something that I think is embarrassing in my own house, no one will ever know. Because why would I share that? Why would I do that? Except for the second one. Because it makes me laugh every time I think about it. I haven't thought about that for ages. But I think almost everyone who knows me knows that story because I've told them because it makes me laugh. Anyway, but yes, if it happens by myself, the stakes are so low because no one else is seeing me make a mistake.
This is such a good point. So I've been looking at an article this week from the British Journal of Education Psychology.
Ooh.
And it's looking at the error climate in a classroom. So I guess we think about classroom climate or classroom culture. And this is specifically looking at the collective attitude and practices in relation to errors and mistakes within a classroom. What's really interesting from this is that all their findings and conclusions that they've been able to draw from their research, which we'll have a little bit of a chat about, were visible at the classroom level. So I think that's a really important takeaway is that like how you as the teacher set up your response and approach to errors in your classroom with your 20 to 30 kids is actually like measurable.
Yeah.
It's not something that has to be necessarily on a wider school basis. I mean, it would be lovely to have a positive error climate within an entire school setting, and that might be the case, and that's fantastic. But I guess what I thought was really exciting about that is that it's impactful even at that small level with the students that you have in your care, in your class right now. Basically, in this article, they define a classroom's error climate as being in one of two categories. So it can be positive or negative. In a positive error climate, errors are usually, treated as natural and constructive parts of learning, and they encourage open discussion and analysis, and they are seen as an opportunity to improve understanding. I think that a lot of teachers that I know would hold that view.
Yes.
And they talk about a negative error climate as, classrooms where there might be punitive or dismissive responses to errors, or, that sort of cause students to fear or avoid giving responses, and ultimately leads to reduced engagement. And unsurprisingly, over time, it has a pretty significant effect on students' motivation and self-efficacy and the relationship they have with their teachers. I think a lot of teachers today work towards a culture of being like, it's okay to make mistakes and that's how we grow, and that's a really important part of learning. But maybe we need to be even more overt than that. So having read through this article a bit more, I think when it comes to the start of the year and we're trying to establish a positive error climate, we need to be more than just neutral toward errors.
Yeah, like any skill that you want your students to develop, you need to be explicit and say, this is our attitude toward mistakes in the classroom.
Yeah.
I think everyone's heard the whole mistakes are proof that you're learning or whatever. And I think this kind of gets to the heart of what is our role, what is your role as a student in the classroom is not to come in and be an expert at everything because you're learning. Like, I don't expect my kiddos to know everything straight away, but even in kindergarten, when they're 6 years old, we are having to reinforce to them, have a go. Like, I think of a specific example where there was a certain student in my class last year who wasn't a very confident drawer, which is funny because that's the way that that students in kindergarten communicate primarily until the second semester when we are more confident with letter formation and words and whatnot. And so I demonstrated. I said, Miss Keane is not the best drawer ever, but Miss Keane's going to have a go. And does it have to be perfect? No, it doesn't. Am I going to have a go anyway? Yes, I am. And yeah, I think I try to put the focus on just have a go. One of our habits of mine that we look at my school is taking responsible risks. And it's that kind of thing where mistakes and your attitude towards them really go to the heart of why are we here in our class? We're here to learn. And if you're learning something, how could I possibly expect you to be perfect straight away? How could you expect yourself to be perfect straight away? And I say this as and drawing in front of my class, so stressful because I hate it and I am really bad. But my beautiful children would say, Miss Keane, that's such a good drawing. They were so lovely and encouraging to me because I had been honest and said, Miss Keane is definitely better at a lot of other things than drawing, but I'm going to have a go anyway because I wanted to demonstrate to them, not like the sky isn't going to fall to earth if you have a go at something that you're not quite sure of. And I mentioned this, I think I've mentioned this quite a few times as I've been learning to crochet over the last 6 months. Learning to do something that was initially completely foreign to me and quite difficult has really allowed me to empathize with my students. And I made lots of mistakes when I was first learning, and now I am so much better. I still make mistakes, but when I do make a mistake, specifically in the context of crocheting, I just accept it as, well, that's just part of making a big project. And my attitude has totally changed, and I'm trying to translate that back to my classroom and really explicitly with my 6-year-olds who really, they're learning everything. It makes me so sad when I hear of a kindergarten child who is too afraid to have a go or is really worried about not being perfect, because where have they learned that? Who's told them that? Or who in their life has unwittingly demonstrated those behaviors and attitudes without realizing what they're doing? If I wasn't around children all the time and teaching them explicitly about making mistakes, I would still, the language I would use towards myself would be, really negative and, mistakes are bad and whatnot. And that is how we, spread culture. We're saying that we need to be explicit in the classroom, but also the implicit stuff, the vibe. The vibe is felt. Children will pick up the vibe and they will learn the habits that the adults or whoever around them are exhibiting, even if those habits are completely unintentional.
Totally. That's really interesting because I actually expected that the little kindies would almost have no fear of making mistakes. And so you're exactly right. It's where have they picked up this concern and this fear from? And it's so difficult to fight against. You feel like you're a salmon.
Yes.
Trying to go totally against the flow because there is this ingrained idea in kids and even parents that an absence of errors is an indicator of successful learning.
Yeah.
And this is just something I just feel like I have to battle against all the time, and especially in high school where students seem to be, I guess they get their reports, they can read their reports, they know their grades, they know their marks, as opposed to that's probably less in their face when they're in lower primary. And, they just think that if they make too many errors, then the less likely they are to get good marks. And so they've created this idea in their mind that an error is equal to a negative event.
Yes.
So then when they make an error, they're full of negative emotions, and then, totally unsurprisingly, they disengage from the task. They're less likely to focus on the reason or the misconception that led to the error. And then any hope of using that error as a learning opportunity is gone. And there's great scope for errors to be a fantastic teaching tool, but I think we actually have to deal with this barrier first. Because to just simply say to our kids, mistakes is how we learn, that that doesn't compute because there is this ingrained belief that errors are bad.
Yeah, 100%. Like that is what I feel in my soul still. Like if I want to understand everything perfectly straight away. And I don't want to make a mistake. I just want to be good at something immediately. Don't want to learn. And yeah, you've got to really unlearn a lot of ingrained habits.
Totally. I just remembered when I was away during the school holidays, I was on a cruise and there were these watercolor painting classes, on the sea days and things that I would go to. And I've dabbled in painting watercolors before myself, but like nothing that fantastic. But I actually cried because I'd been to a few of them, maybe 4 or 5 of the classes, and I was still just feeling like every time I'd walk away with my painting and it was nothing like what I was wanting it to look like.
Yep.
And I was sure that I was following the instructions of the, presenter and really trying to do my best, but it just felt like nothing was working. And, my mum thinks they're great, but I want to think they're great.
Yes.
And I actually, I had a little moment where I started crying because when I try something new, I'm not expecting to be fantastic at it, but I can feel myself going through that trial and error process and going, okay, that didn't work. Let me change what I did here. Okay, I can see the benefit from that. And you feel like you're working towards something. And these paintings were just not going anywhere. And I was just devastated. And I was really upset. And so anyway, I guess I can really understand how kids can feel just like it's not worth trying anymore if they're not seeing that sense of improvement. I read a different article, not related to this specifically, but about teachers who presented their students with, say, their maths homework, maths problems or whatever. So they gave them, half the class had like just the set of challenging problems and half the class had the same set of challenging problems, but interspersed were some easier ones. And the data kind of showed that the students who did the ones that had the easy questions in with them did better at the harder questions too, because it was kind of like they had, when they got to the questions that they were like, oh yeah, I know how to do that, it then boosted their motivation and that resilience to be like, okay, let me try this harder one now, rather than just kind of feeling like it's hard and, I don't want to make a mistake and then just sort of shut down. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, that is fascinating. I'm someone who would literally shed tears during maths exams because I was so stressed and like it was all hard. But I'm now thinking about when I'm doing a crossword on my phone and I don't instantly know the answer to at least a couple of the clues. I'm like, I don't want to do this. But then if I know the answer to some of them and I can like fill in a few of the, like populate some of the squares and go, oh, okay, like I'm making a little bit of progress, even something as trivial as a crossword, or I can just look up the answers if I really want to finish it. That totally checks out. That makes sense.
Yeah. So I think we would be unsurprised to know that if you have an error-friendly classroom, it's usually associated with increased motivation, better goal orientation for our students. So we have spoken before about learning goals versus performance goals. So students who set learning goals focus more on the what have I learnt outcome rather than what is my grade outcome. So if you have an error-friendly classroom, you tend to have more learning goal-oriented students, which is a good thing. It can also have a really positive impact on students' self-efficacy, which is, again, a student's belief in their ability to execute something correctly or at least be able to learn how to do something. And a really positive impact on student enjoyment of learning and subsequently the effort that they put in. What I also think was most fascinating is that an error-friendly classroom is predicted to result in less anxiety, less perceived helplessness, and increased engagement in metacognition.
And the perceived helplessness, oh my goodness, that triggers me as a teacher, as a kindergarten teacher. And yeah, it all makes sense and it all ties in. It's just this big circle of this impacts this. And yeah, if my students who are willing to have a go are the ones who have a greater sense of self-efficacy because they're willing to have a go in the first place and like, maybe I will succeed. And they're therefore less likely to go, Miss Keane, I don't know what I'm doing, and just sit there.
Yeah.
It just, it makes so much sense. I love it.
And I think a lot of us, we're unsurprised to kind of hear these facts. One of the things I thought was a really interesting point that the article made, and we'll link the article at the bottom of the show notes for you, but it talks about how a classroom is obviously a social environment. And this comes back to what we were talking about, making errors in our car. So when you make an error on your own and it's kind of like a private error, it's maybe a bit easier to just kind of go, oh, well, that was unfortunate, and move on with life. But when we make an error in a classroom, there's so many reactions and it's a much, much more complex dynamic. And the errors aren't just personal, but there's this social dimension. And the article argues that whether a student will learn from a mistake or not comes down to the social context of the classroom, because we're talking about emotions, we're talking about motivation, and how the teachers and the peers actually respond in an error situation. So surprisingly, I didn't expect this because I thought that peers would maybe hold more like social capital.
Yeah, I would have assumed that too. Yeah.
Yeah. But the article shows that teachers actually hold a really prominent position in the classroom, and it's the teacher behaviour that has the greater impact on the behaviour of single students.
Wow.
And how they respond to their errors.
No pressure. I'm constantly reminded of how influential we are as teachers, and it's sometimes very stressful.
Yeah, I think it's super stressful because if someone makes an error and you're already like not having a great day, even a low key like sense of frustration, or if students can detect some stress in your voice, I've already explained this, but I'll explain it again. I think it's those kinds of things that can actually cause students to kind of observe that errors are problematic and causing problems for the teacher. And even though the article initially describes a negative error climate as, ones where teachers might reprimand or call students out and make them really overtly uncomfortable for making mistakes, I don't think that happens very often. But it's more those incidental in passing things. I know that if I've already explained something and I have a student who's made a mistake and I'm already a bit agitated and I might use a frustrated tone of voice while I'm trying to explain it for the 700th time that lesson, that might be the kind of things that they pick up on that actually contributes to a negative error climate rather than a positive one. And so that's why I think that we have to do more than just say, making mistakes is how we learn. We have to really counteract and be really aware of our responses when we are maybe stressed or concerned or frustrated.
Yeah, it makes me think that like there are so many things in a classroom that you can influence and manipulate for positive outcomes. We have to be so switched on all the time as teachers because everything we do, because we're so influential in our students' lives, apparently, so stressful, everything we do is going to have an impact. So we need to be so careful about all of our responses. It just that point about being very explicit and not just saying a couple of times, mistakes are good. Mistakes aren't bad.
Yeah.
It's how students feel in the classroom is going to contribute to that error climate.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're picking up that you get frustrated every time you have to repeat yourself, because students should be listening. However, if they're picking up, like you were saying, that your tone is a bit frustrated or you seem a bit impatient or whatever, they're going to remember that way more than any of the nonsense you just spit out.
Yeah.
It's actions do speak louder than words. It's it's true. It's so true. And we just have a huge responsibility as teachers.
And I think this is the biggest point for me that I took out of the article is that you might believe mistakes are good, mistakes are important, mistakes are how we learn. It's actually the student's perceived error climate that has the big impact. So exactly like you say, actions speak louder than words. If they perceive errors as negative because of various interactions they've had, whether it's from your classroom or somewhere that they've come from before, it doesn't matter really whether you think errors are positive or not. They need to perceive that. And if they still perceive their error climate as a negative error climate, then that's where you've got to start. You've got to start with changing their perception because you can say whatever you want up the front. And if they still think that errors are bad and mistakes are scary, then it doesn't matter what you say. So one thing that I think sometimes we might jump to try and sort of say, hey guys, mistakes are okay, is to maybe give examples of mistakes on the board. And I don't know what this might look like in a kindy context, but I know, if you had, say, a question that someone had answered incorrectly, even if it's de-identified or whatever, if you start unpacking errors from the front before you've actually changed the climate, I think that's just scarier.
Oh, yeah. It's like, oh my goodness, I could be publicly shamed, even if it's de-identified. Like my mistake is going to be put up there and it's something that needs to be fixed. It's not something that can just be accepted on its own. I think as teachers, we also want to be really prepared and we've got our lesson plan and sometimes we're reading from a script or it's less likely that we're going to be making mistakes purely just because of the nature of our profession and how we need to be prepared when we walk into the classroom. But if we can make genuine mistakes, that's always a teaching moment.
Absolutely.
And I would call my kids goofy goobers anytime they made a mistake because it's cute and fun and to be like, oh, whatever, whatever. It's you dropped the pencil. Oh, well. If I made a mistake, because I would often, and towards the end of term 4, I was all over the place and my kids would call me a goofy goober. And I was like, this is great. This is actually the kind of error climate I want. Like if I'm making a mistake, like I wrote the wrong word on the board or I couldn't figure out how to turn the smartboard on even though I've been using it for a whole year or whatever, just having the kids respond that way just made it, that particular phrase, goofy goober, just made everything a little bit lighter. But it's also like, it's no sweat. It's water off a duck's back. It's fine. You're a goofy goober if we make a mistake, but does it have any bearing on you as a person, as an individual, on your value as a human being? No, it does not. And will we recover from it? Yes. And are we going to learn? Yes, we are.
Yeah. Especially learning mistakes or classroom mistakes like that. And I've seen some articles that have been written about here's how you can make mistakes more okay in your classroom and find good mistakes that people have made and talk to your class about it. And while that might be a good strategy, we have to address the error climate first. And so there's an article by Carl Slater released last year on Edutopia, and he suggests 3 different activities that you can try to gently introduce students to this idea of trying to build a mistake tolerance.
I like that a lot.
I really like it too. The first idea he said was jigsaw activities. So I've come across jigsaw activities before in research tasks.
Yeah, like a divide and conquer kind of thing.
Yes. But he sort of talks about it as in you might have a piece of text or information that has been cut up into chunks and you give it to a group of students and collaboratively they kind of have to piece those chunks together into something that makes logical or sequential sense. It's really low stakes, but it's just familiarizing them with that trial and error kind of approach. Oh no, that doesn't look good there. Let's swap that with this one. And when they're doing it in a collaborative nature rather than on their own or in front of other people as an individual, it also really helps to just, kind of get rid of that mentality of them feeling like they're stepping out on their own and they're taking a massive risk. But if it's this kind of collaborative trial and error, let's see if we can arrange the things so that it makes sense, it helps them to develop this grit that we want our expert learners to have. So I think I really loved that, because as teachers, I know that I think we can often forget what it's like to be at school, because maybe we loved school and that's why we're teachers. Like that's not the case for everyone, but I think there's a huge proportion of people that school really worked for. They really love learning. They're really passionate about it, so they became teachers. And I think when you're a more experienced learner, we forget the kinds of strategies that our less experienced learners need, like those trial and error strategies and that resilience.
Yes, and especially when, in my context, when my students were born in 2019 or 2020.
Goodness.
Which is just offensive. I am way more experienced than them, and it's very interesting to look at my kiddos, especially at the start of kindergarten, when I'm explaining to them, this is how you open your lunchbox. This is how you unzip your bag. And it's like, I was like this too, and I need to remember what it's like to not know anything and to be a child in a world where you're told to do everything by grown-ups. You really need to be empathetic, especially in this context we're talking about, and go, actually, how would I feel if I was in this situation, if I was that age with that what was I like when I was 15? What did I know? What was my maturity level like? And yeah, it's a real exercise in empathy being a teacher. And yeah, you need to be aware of how your students are perceiving your actions in your error climate. Because it doesn't matter what you intend if the outcome is the opposite.
This next one he suggests is something that I absolutely 100% want to take into my class this year. Probably couldn't do it with kindergartners, but maybe by the end of the year. He talks about using a GIST scaffold, which was not something that I'd heard of before. GIST stands for Generating Interactions Between Schemata and Texts. So again, it's another text-based activity. And schemata we've spoken about before. It's kind of like the part of our memory where we stored and categorized information. And then as we're learning new things, we're trying to link it to that already existing information to help make connections and make more meaning out of things. So basically, the idea is you give your students a text and you give them this GIST scaffold. Now, we'll link the article in the show notes, and then the article also has a link to the scaffold so you can have a look at what it looks like. But basically, the students answer the questions who, what, when, where, why, how in relation to the text. And then they have to use their answers to those questions to come up with a summary of the text that is 20 words or less.
Oh, wow.
And now I think this is so hard because, I'm a bit of a waffler, and to keep something to 20 words is just a bit insane. But it's a low stakes entry point where they kind of have to grapple with their ideas. So they might write their first 20 words and then realize, oh, I've actually only answered who, what, when, but not the where, why, and how or whatever. And so then they have to go back and take out some words and swap it out and refine and alter and adjust and maybe decide on synonyms that are more comprehensive, that sort of gives them a bit more space to fit something else in at the bottom. And it's all this wrestling with their ideas and coming to terms with the fact that their first approach might not be the best. That helps slowly with building that mistake tolerance. We want them to be able to have that internal dialogue where it's like, oh, that maybe wasn't a great word choice. Let me swap it out for something else here. I think it's great because it's not really a right or wrong error, but it's getting them familiar with that resilience of trying to work out the best solution for something.
I love that. And I would love to do something similar, adapted for my kiddos, because they don't know how to do a second draft. They think that when they're done, they're done. And they don't quite understand the idea of revising your work and making sure it's accurate and of a high standard. which are all things that we focus on with our habits of mind, which I really need to do a better job of this year. That is such, I love that so much because there's a very clear objective with the 20 words, but the way you go about it doesn't have to be a particular way. There's no formula you need to know, but there's a very clear objective that's almost impossible to meet completely the first time. I really love that. I love this idea of trial and error as like error is in the name. You will be making errors and like that's okay. Like I love that so much. And it not only does it address, making mistakes, but also the idea that, good work takes practice and multiple iterations and 10,000 light bulbs or whatever that thing is.
Yeah.
I love that. That is so cool. I want to I really want to work at making one for kindy kids because that makes sense to me. That's such a good learning activity. Good job, Carl.
I think you're right though. The idea of how we struggle to get students to go back and refine their work, that's also part of the fear of making mistakes. I think it's like they've done it, they've been able to do it. They don't want to be able to say that they could do it better because that would mean that they didn't do a good job the first time.
And then you got to do it again. Who wants to do that? Actually, that is so true.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to roll my last couple of things into sort of one big idea. So we've spoken before about active modeling and think alouds and that being a really useful strategy for modeling how we want our students to approach a particular way to solve a problem. And I think critical thinking is, a big idea at the moment. We're talking about it in relation to the challenges of AI and trying to teach our students to be critical thinkers. We can often approach critical thinking as something that's just like a luxury that we'll be able to teach if we've got time for. And so being able to integrate critical thinking with our actual content learning, I think is really essential because at the end of the day, we're never going to have time to just teach add-on extra things. Time is not a luxury that teachers have. And so we want our students to be able to read, whether it's something that's been produced by AI or just something that they find on the internet. We want them to have the skill of being able to look at something and identify mistakes and to be able to kind of wrestle with whether something is true and accurate or not. And I think maybe starting there is then a good point to be able to then progress towards, reading their own work, their own text, and then being able to identify their own mistakes because it's much easier to identify mistakes in someone else's writing
100%
than in their own learning. But I think what we can often do as teachers when we do modeling and think alouds, we often just model the right process.
Yes.
And so I actually don't think it's a default for us to model, oh, I drew that wrong, or I misread that line, or whatever it is. And so the recommendation here in terms of building that tolerance for mistakes is when we are modeling critical thinking or reading or drawing or whatever particular skill it is, to actually purposely model through errors that we make. Maybe we don't make them as much anymore, but maybe we used to, or errors that we anticipate our students will make, and then show them how we would use trial and error or backtrack and retrack to actually work through the mistake that we made. And maybe even modeling the kind of language I would use, like the self-talk I would use, like, oh, I understand why I made that mistake because I accidentally did that last time or whatever, and I know what I need to do now to fix that. And so when we model that kind of dialogue for our students, the idea is that we're slowly trying to help them see that making that mistake is not associated with a negative emotion. It's actually associated with helping me get to my goal.
It's a part of the process. It is inevitable. And I do like the whole trial and error phrase because it has error in there. Yeah. Like it's expected that you will use errors to improve. Like that's the whole point of a trial and error.
Totally.
I love Carl. He makes lots of sense. High five, Carl, from me, some non-academic baby teacher who you don't know.
My very last idea that I came across in a different article, but this is my favorite and I'm saving it for now. One thing that you could do is have your students respond to a problem to purposely try and create an error that they think someone might make. So I guess if you're doing this in maths, give them a problem and then they have to purposely skip out a part of the working out process. And then they have to be able to justify, well, this is an answer that someone might get to and here's why it's wrong. Maths, I guess, is an easy example. But for me in design and tech, one of the things my students really struggle with, a skill, could be, proper isometric drawings. And I might ask them to incorrectly draw it and then be able to tell me which part of it is incorrect and why. And so the challenge with this idea is students have to come up with errors that are not wildly unfeasible.
It's kind of a logical error. Like you can be like, oh, I see why you did that.
Which kind of sounds like an
oxymoron,
a logical error. But yeah, so actually giving our students an opportunity to come up with a logical error and explain why that might be an error and how to avoid that error is firstly, I think, a bit of fun. But secondly, it takes away all of the personal pressure, like what if I make a mistake? No, I'm asking you to show me what mistakes people might make. And then they're not feeling like they're doing it wrong. They're actually doing it right by showing an error.
Yeah.
I just think that's really cool.
Yes. And it's a creative way to approach this problem. Like Andrea was saying in our last episode, we love Andrea. Teachers are creative and you have to be creative to approach something as pervasive as the error climate in your classroom. I'm just loving all of these. Like I really am. And in the back of my brain, there's some differentiation going on for kindergarten. Because we have to explicitly teach so many of the cultural things we want in our classrooms anyway. Why not add errors to the list?
Yeah.
I mean, because we have limited time, but add the errors to the list anyway.
I think we will see huge benefits and maybe even save some time. If you take the time to build a positive error climate, you're going to end up with students who are more motivated and have greater self-efficacy. Maybe you'll save some time.
As just a teacher nerd, that was really entertaining to listen to your research and then, interject here and there. But, that was really good. So thank you so much. We are on all the socials. We're on Instagram. We're on Facebook at Teaching Together, the podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and any of the other episodes, please leave us a review, an honest review. But we also don't want to ruin our awesome streak on Spotify of 18 5-stars. So, that's so many. So if you want to contribute to the streak, that'd be great. But we will love you forever anyway. Thank you so much for listening. And we will see you next time. Bye.